Howdy, all you delicious people. I'm here today to review I Am Not Okay With This. So this is the first three episodes of the show. I just decided to just kind of go into this show because I saw the word superpowers. I was like, okay, what is this about? Really going on and not putting a lot of hope into this show. Just kind of thinking, I'm like, okay, like I've seen kind of shows where they say they have superpowers and it comes to find out to just be like not the real push of the show, and that's kind of true within this one. Like this show to me kind of reminds me of Mortal, where it seems that like a lot of times it's like the power thing is kind of like the back seat until like we get further and further into the season, and then they kind of focus a lot more on the power part of it. So going to this show, we have Sydney, who is to be grieving the loss of her father. And so, with that loss, it seems that Sydney's life is to get a little bit more complicated, or to have Sydney be very much more angry, to where Sydney is to go on and have these like fits of rage, which have her break pencils or have her go on and uh, cut her own hair, and is to have her kind of kick over this trash can. So, but all the while, Sydney eventually, when it seems that she is to have other fits of rage at other points, she is to also have this telekinesis to be able to move objects with her mind. Eventually, showcasing at some points that she is to move certain items, and eventually, this is to start to escalate within these three episodes to kind of showcase her raw power that she doesn't know quite yet how to control. So we have Sydney that, for the most point of these three episodes, is to have kind of like this common life story uh, of her having a best friend, and that best friend talking about having a boyfriend, and then Sydney has to go and have a boyfriend, and like it's a lot of just common stuff. And then every once in a while, like the superpower thing kicks in for a brief moment, and then you're like, oh, wow, like I guess that's a superpower show. To really have me go on and be like, wow, like the whole superpower thing is just kind of a clickbaiting element to keep people interested, that probably wouldn't normally. But like, it seems that this story is just good enough to continue to keep my interest, even though I'm not much of a high school story kind of character. And this seems to be kind of really focused on that. Because I really didn't like much of the like the Spider-Man films, eventually anything after the Tobey Maguire ones, because it just became like high school story focused, and I just hated those. Um, but I think I can just say that this show so far is an okay show. Um, Really, I'm kind of interested in seeing where it's going. If people are interested in this show, then I will go on and just kind of check it out further. Um, like, there's just some interesting things here that get my curiosity enough. Even though there are sometimes through this episode where I'm immediately like, this is where this character is immediately going to head, or eventually this is where this character is going to head. And surefire enough, I'm like, wow, like this is what a shocker, this show. Um, but it kind of feels that Sydney is to maybe possibly have to figure out these powers at some point to maybe do some good in her community. She's not going to be putting on a cape and cowl and saving the day anytime soon. But like there may just be some kind of way that this power may factor into this show, but I'm not quite sure exactly yet. So that'll eventually be interesting. And we also kind of have this to really just play off Carrie as if like we are to say that like this is another variation of a Carrie kind of show. like this girl who is an outcast that at some point is possibly going to have us continue to see this build up of this story that we're not quite sure what the heck is going on inside the story of this Carrie moment. So we'll see about that. We'll see where that goes. So with that said, being very vague, but like once you get into the show, you'll know exactly what I mean by the whole Carrie moment. So with that said, let's go and double five this bad boy up. Yeah. So I would recommend people watching this. There's some interesting elements here. Probably if you just don't like this kind of character, you probably won't like this kind of show. But I think people could possibly relate to this character or eventually just like something about this show. Just because it's interesting enough. So with that said, let's go into spoiler time. Spoiler time. It's about that time we get into spoil this episode. So, or these episodes. So there's like something about this show that I might get confused about what happens through all these 3 episodes. Just because it's a lot of the same. But I hope I'm going to be able to kind of get everything kind of put out there. So with that said, because it's a lot of the same old, so we'll hopefully eventually get into all of this. So Sydney is to go on and is to go to school, like any normal kid would. And so Sydney is to go on and to have lost her father, and so she goes to this grief counselor, and I've been to a grief counselor before when I had lost a family member during, like, a time of school. In all honesty, like, the grief counseling, like, wasn't really, like, working. Like, it was just, like, I don't know what, like, I don't really know, like, how this is gonna really help. And so I went on and like I went to this thing and I was like, okay, this is kind of becoming like more homework, like on top of school. But it was nice. It was just like it wasn't really working. But really, like the legitimate thing was just the factor of like the grief counseling thing was right during a certain class of a teacher I did not like. There are quite often some times in certain schools, in certain school years, there's certain teachers that I'm just like, I do not like this person. And that coincidentally was just one of those. So I was like, okay, well, at least this gets me to not be in that class with a teacher I do not like, and I could just kind of go on and feel the relief of not being in that classroom with that kind of teacher. Because there's certain times with just certain teachers where it's just like, man, they have an axe to grind or something. I don't know what it is. It's weird. So, and eventually you'll find out like some teachers like or like just to pinpoint you and just want to go on and like yeah like I want to go on and just like have this kid be like the one that's gonna like be the kid that I bully throughout the whole time that he's in my class. So that's always great. And I wasn't always that person, but still. So pushing on. So Sydney is to go on and do this whole notebook thing because the counselor's like, well, like, go and just write in this book and it'll probably help you relieve all the stress that you obviously are building up. So Sydney is to go on and do all these things that I said that she is to go on and do by breaking pencils and all these kind of crazy things. And so none of this is really working, but she's just kind of writing in this notebook. And not even the counselor is going to really even look at this notebook. So Sydney just kind of finds this to really just be pointless, that she can go on and just write anything. and it probably wouldn't matter. Like her order that she ordered at Mickey D's, because would it really matter? So Sydney goes on and is to be with her friend Dina or Dinah. I'm going to say Dina. I normally don't ever remember names all that well, so it's lucky I can even have a list of names for a cast list. So Sydney and Dina are to be together, kind of sharing uh, this shake and eventually having a thing of fries. So Sydney is to go on and have the first time ever of her getting upset and her using her powers by her all of a sudden cracking her wall open to where Sydney just puts a dresser in front of it, and it's to just kind of hide the fact that there's this big massive hole in her wall. And that's like the first of her realizing that she might have powers. So Sydney then goes on and is with Dina, and so Dina is mentioning that she was to have this guy named Brad, and that things were kind of getting quickly hot and heavy because this guy was to be shirtless and so on and so forth. And so Sydney is like, "Well, did you guys use protection?" And Dina's like, "Yeah." So we have Sydney starting to realize, like, well, hey, like, maybe I should go on and, like, maybe if it seems that Dina is to go on and have all these stories and I don't have anything like that, maybe I should go on and maybe I should find a guy to just kind of be even with her. So Sydney is to go on and find a guy named Stanley, and this seems to be just kind of this guy who like doesn't really care, like no F's given kind of guy, and so Stanley is be walking on this road just barefoot. And so Stanley's asking Sydney, it's like, well, hey, do you want to hang out sometime? And Sydney's like, sure, yeah. So Stanley and Sydney go off to just go to this baseball game to homecoming. And so we have Stanley that is to mention like how like kind of like poetic this all is, and that there's obviously a certain way that this is going to go down, like this whole match and this whole game is to come down, and so we have Sydney and we have Stanley eventually watching the game, and so after the game, both Sydney and Stanley are to just kind of smoke weed together and they're to hang out. And so this all of a sudden leads to them kind of asking questions to one another. And like it seems that like the questions are to be like two-parters, but it seems that at some point they just kind of answer like half the questions. So because Stanley's asking like Sydney about like, well, hey, what would you rather be, a jellyfish or some other kind of animal? And so Sydney goes on and answer this question. So Sydney is to ask like, well, hey, like, what would you like? Would you have superpowers? And Stanley's like, well, like, obviously the whole superpower thing. Like, I'm gonna go with that answer. And so then Sydney's like, well, what superpower would you have? And so Stanley is like, well, I want to be a shapeshifter because I want to go on and shapeshift into being a jellyfish. And Sydney's like, well, like, what's the big deal about a jellyfish? And so Stanley goes on and says, like, well, I want to go on and be this jellyfish because I know I'll live forever. And if the world is going to end, then it's going to be jellyfishes and roaches left on the world, on the planet. And I'll have, like, been the king of planet Earth because I'm a shapeshifter. Which I'm like, yeah, I guess that makes that makes some sense, but when you would look at it, like, well, can you shapeshift to like anything? Could you shapeshift to a car that always has enough gas to get you anywhere? Like, could you go on and like be anything? That's the whole question of it all. Like, I guess you could also just be like, you could shapeshift into a plane and then just fly anywhere, but still. So Stanley and Sydney. So eventually, while they go on and they continue to ask one another questions, and eventually Stanley is to like, well, hey, like, what is your deepest, darkest secret? And so you would think that Sydney's secret would go on and be that she has like these powers, and she would showcase this to him because they're high anyways. But Sydney is just to go on and mention that she has like acne upon her thigh. Because again, Sydney is to go on and say that I guess she is kind of going through puberty, and so she chalks everything up to her eventually just be going through puberty, supposedly. That when eventually she showcases these telekinesis like powers, moving things with her mind and breaking things and whatever, that she just chalks it up to like, well, maybe it's puberty. So we have Sydney that goes on and is to, of course, at the end of all this, she ends up kissing Stanley, and eventually they end up doing more than that. But there's also another story here. So Sydney, when Stanley is to first ask her, like, hey, do you want to hang out? Sydney is to be asked by her mother, who I believe is Maggie, to go and do grocery shopping. Because Sydney's going to be working at the diner, and so Sydney needs to eventually chip in and go and do grocery shopping. So Sydney goes on and is to have gotten $50 from her mother, and so Sydney needs somebody to help her go grocery shopping with, and so she needs to find somebody with a car. So Sydney goes to this bowling alley to ask Stanley, like, well, hey, can I borrow your car? And Stanley's like, well, like, hey, I can just kind of go with you and help you out. So Sydney goes with Stanley to go to this grocery store, and it seems that Sydney is to not have enough money to pay for all the groceries that she is to buy. So Sydney just starts putting things back. So Sydney goes through this aisle, and all of a sudden, every single thing from this aisle is to all fall out of the aisle. And Sydney is to chalk this up as like, oh my god, this is my superpower at work. And so Stanley is to make his way through this aisle to see Sydney, like, oh, are you having like a panic attack? Like, I know people who've had that. And so Stanley just kind of goes on and is to kind of finish up the grocery shopping and like be a very nice guy about things. Like he was going to spot her like the rest of that money. But Sydney didn't want to do that because she thought like she would probably have to owe Stanley something in the end of all things. So Sydney used to go on and say that, like, you know what, Stanley's like a really nice guy, and the more and more I get like to know him, it seems like he's really nice. And so like there's something about this guy that Sydney might want to be with him. Like as a possible boyfriend potential. So Sydney then goes on and is to tell Dina that Sydney and Stanley were to go on and have Stanley go down on her, which Sydney didn't go into much of details, so I'm kind of curious if like that really happened or Sydney just made that up to just go on and just be like, well, nothing really happened, but I just want to win some points over with my friend. Because really, I just kind of want to see how things are to possibly play out, where there might be a lie or there might be something that we weren't aware of. So we have Sydney mentioning to Stanley, or we have Sydney mentioning to Dina about this whole like him Stanley going down on her, and so we have Sydney's brother who's kind of in the same diner who can kind of hear it from like a ear stretch away. So we then have Bradley, who makes it into this diner, and all he cares about is like, oh, Sydney. It's like, hey, if your mother's working here, do you think we can get free burgers? And Sydney's like, no, my mother's not here, so we're not going to get free burgers. And so Brad just comes in here and starts eating up the fries as if they're his, because he didn't pay for them, but I guess, whatever. So we have Sydney, who just, the longer and longer that she's with Brad, and the more she just hates this guy because he's a jock, or he's just an a-hole, or whatever. So Sydney is to just want this guy to just, like, you know what, if I could just, like, get rid of this guy somehow or another, that would be wonderful. So we go on, and all of a sudden Brad is to have this nosebleed, this gusher, and Sydney's like, oh my god, did I do that? Or is it just like a coincidence, a quinky dink? So we have, of course, Dina talking about this party that she's possibly invited to. Like, she was invited, but Sydney wasn't invited. But it seems that Dina could really go out of her way to invite Sydney, but it seems like she's really not going on and doing that, because Dina only gives a about Dina, it seems. Whatever is to benefit her the most during that time window. Sadly enough, but it sounds kind of true. So, and I'm kind of wondering if things are going to come to a head with both Dina and Sydney at some point. But anyways, pushing on. So, especially with how the third episode ends, I'm kind of curious. But anyways, so we have Sydney and we have her little brother walking off. And so Sydney's brother is going on and telling Sydney, it's like, well, hey, like, what were you mentioning to Sydney about going down somewhere? Like, what were you talking about? And Sydney's like, oh yeah, like, Stanley's this travel agent guy, and like, he's really good at going down to Mexico. Sure, that's what she meant by that. Uh-huh, I know exactly what Sydney actually meant. But, like, you know, whatever. Anyways, so we have Sydney, who notices Stanley's driving by. And so Stanley is asking, like, hey, like, Sydney, like, how's it going? It's all that awkwardness, and like, hey. Like, so Stanley's asking Sydney, it's like, well, hey, like, would you mind, like hanging out some more, or maybe just kind of like just going together, you know? So Sydney's like, well, I would, but I have this party that I'm gonna go to. And Stanley's like, oh, really? Like, I just coincidentally also got invited to the same party. What a coinky dink. And Sydney's like, oh, like, yeah, like, I'll see you there kind of thing. So Sydney wasn't really invited to this party, but I guess since she has friends who are going there, like, I guess Sydney is, like, just inviting herself, technically. So, because we have a guy, I believe his name is Ricky Berry, that is throwing this party. So, and plus Dina is to be friends with Brad, who is to be this jock guy who knows this guy. And so, like, of course they would get invited. So we go on to this party, and Sydney and Dina are kind of getting, like, these dresses, because normally Sydney just kind of wears, like, these jeans and these shirts, which is perfectly okay for a woman. Like, I would much rather, like, have a woman just be comfortable in what she's wearing rather than having to just dress to the nines all the time. Good God. Just be comfortable. Freaking, like, when really looking at it, I don't know how many times so many women would go on and it's like 20 below. Yeah, I'm gonna wear a dress, and I'm just viciously cold, and I don't know why. Yeah, probably the dress. Probably how about you put on some layers, because you're complaining about it, and I'm getting annoyed. Just like it's good to, like, dress nice, but like, if you want to get sick more often, then lose the dress. And I mean, like, put on some more clothes. Uh, and don't complain about how cold you are, because you should know good and well. Uh, anyways, that was horrible to say. Anyways, pushing on. So, because we in northern states, and it gets cold up like all up in here, very cold. So that is what it is. Moving on. So Sydney is assigned to wear this dress, and because Dina's kind of pushing her, so Sydney's like, okay, I'll wear the dress. So, but we have Sydney with this hoodie on. It's like, yeah, like that's her superhero uniform is the hoodie. Because I know for me, I have a ton of hoodies that I probably don't wear as often as I probably should. But I love hoodies. They're great. Plus also like it's extra pockets sometimes when eventually I just have def- so many pockets that I desperately need for reasons I don't understand. But anyways, so Sydney goes to this party, and at first it seems uh, like she's with Dina, and they're dancing it out, and everything goes great. And then all of a sudden, like Sydney sees Stanley. It's like, oh hey Stanley, you're here. Let's kind of sit by this couch and just kind of like just talk about things. As Dina is like, hey Stanley, I don't really know you all that well, but like let me get to know you a little bit, because you're with my friend. Like I give a rip. I'm just saying this now because, like, considering you're here and you're with my friend, I have to play the friend card. But eventually, when I have something better to do, I will not give a single F. So, and here's when this happens. So, all of a sudden, Brad comes into the party, and it's to mention how this guy who's throwing this party is to throw the best parties, even though he kind of calls him a name or two. So, Brad comes into this party and is to notice that his friend, or his technical girlfriend, Dina, and Sydney are dancing together, and he's like, well, I'm going to split that up somehow. So Brad is going on and telling Dina, it's like, well, hey, like, how about you come to me within this, like, other place and we just kind of relax, because my ankle really hurts. Because in that football game, he ends up injuring himself, and so he's like, yeah, my ankle hurts. Can we just kind of, like, go over here and sit over, like, a million miles away from where your friend is? Because there's something shady going on there. So we have Dina that it's like, well, like, Sydney's like, well, how about we just, like, finish the song at least? And Brad's like, I just really want to go off and just, just sit. And Dina, you coming? So Dana's like, well, yeah, I guess I should go with him. Like, Sydney's like, really? Like, wow, okay. Just blow me off. Just go ahead. So Sydney goes back with Stanley, but then we have eventually Sydney that's just kind of feeling uncomfortable in the party, and then so she just decides to leave and just go and play basketball and have these jeans on and hoodie on. So Stanley is to go on and is to meet up with Sydney. And so Stanley is kind of working up the courage. More than likely, he probably had a couple of weeds or beers or things of sorts. So Stanley was to work up the courage to talk to Sydney and say that, like, well, hey, like, you know what, if you're going to homecoming, like, are you going to homecoming? Do you feel like you're going to go? And Sydney's like, well, maybe on the day of, like, I might decide. And Stanley's like, well, like, honestly, I would like you to go with me if that's okay. Like, like, both of us together, it could happen, And so Sydney's like, well, like, I'm not quite sure. I don't know. And so Sydney's just rattling off all these things into her brain like a million miles a minute. And so Sydney is starting to realize that, like, Stanley's a nice guy and all, but she doesn't know if she really is to see Stanley as boyfriend material, as if she eventually is to go on and, like, start to contemplate whether or not that she really wants to be with Stanley or just have a boyfriend altogether. And so Sydney's like, well, that's a great idea and all, but no. So Sydney, after a while, is to come and find out that Dina is to be in this room. She's crying. So Sydney's there to comfort Dina. Come to find out, Dina and Brad had broken up. Oh my god, just tears in my eyes because of that horrible dilemma. So, who cares? Like, it's just really, like, one little tiny thing and Brad's like, broken up. Like, if I would have snapped my fingers and you would have done everything that I wanted you to do, then we wouldn't have broken up. But, like, since I snapped my fingers and you didn't care, you had to wait, like, half a second. Oh, no. Broken up. Because I am the pro athlete. I am the, I am the big man on campus, so heaven forbid. Whatever. Whatever with that moment. So Sydney is there to comfort Dina, and Dina's like, well, I don't know if I want to have a boyfriend right now, and I don't know, I'm not quite sure. So Sydney is to all of a sudden realize, like, well, like, maybe there is a reason why I don't want Stanley right now in my life as a boyfriend. Maybe I've just come to some other conclusion. And so Sydney goes on and is to kiss Dina, and I'm like, I knew it. I knew, weirdly, that Sydney would just be interested in girls. I didn't know why, but I just had that feeling from the get-go that eventually that's how they would write this story somehow. Because I feel like there's always that just, feeling of, like, it wasn't because of how Sydney, acted, or like it wasn't some kind of thing where it's like it was some kind of radar of some point, but it was just like I just had this weird goofy feeling that Sydney was going to kiss Dina, and like somewhere in the show that Sydney was to say that she was interested in girls. And I'm kind of curious if that's going to stay, or maybe just Sydney is just kind of just feeling things out. Which, that's okay. So, Sydney's experimenting. Anybody can freaking do that. And eventually end up with probably nobody, because that could be also a solution. Hey, like, life sucks. Anyways, so Dina is to go on after the kiss with Sydney and just be like, well, gee, I don't think that I feel that way. And so Sydney's like, oh my god, I just kissed my friend, and what a mistake that was. So Sydney runs off, and she again is to be running into this forest, and she's just very upset. And so she ends up using her powers by accident again, just demolishing some trees within this forest. And she's like, "Oh my god! Like, I am really just wreaking havoc in this with this power of mine that I can't control." So, really, within these first 3 episodes, that's kind of really what we get for this show so far. And like, I probably did race through a bunch of stuff, or like I probably didn't get through every single detail of everything. Like, we did have moments where Sydney was to talk to her mother, and like about how the AC is broken, and then like Maggie was going on and just like, well, open a window. Like, oh well, like I don't have the money to fix anything. And like, when you have a family that doesn't really have money, like, it's like, yeah, like, basically, if you don't have the convenience of air conditioning, like, hey, just crack open a window, or find a really cheap fan that you can just kind of blow into your room. Um, for a while, I had a room that had a fan right into it, so it was like, yeah, anything like during the summertime, like I would just be blowing that fan like consistently, so that was always great. Um, but yeah, now in this room, I just have like this little fan, but I'm always cold in this room, so because this is to basically have it to where it's like cold is blowing all year round. So I never feel that I absolutely need a fan. So that's great because air conditioning exists. So that's cool. So with that said, a little tidbit about my life at some points, as if it really matters. But so, anyways, with that said, I think I'm just gonna get out of here because I think I've covered most of this show, and some people may not even be interested in this review. So if you are, and if you watch this whole thing, I really do appreciate it. Because really, at the end of the day, these reviews are really hard to eventually do, and then people aren't exactly always interested in them. So that's fine because eventually I'll just find this one random thing that just works somehow, some way. So maybe this might be it. I doubt it because this is a show that's been out for a while. But luck can strike a billion times over. Who knows? So with that said, goodbye, everybody. Bye, everybody.